In Laboratory Reddit, today's story is:
For 22 years my parents idolized my successful brother. When he abandoned them, they tried to manipulate me. All my life, my brother Josh, 25, has been my parents' undisputed favorite. As their younger brother of 22 years, I grew up watching my parents Joseph, 49, and Ruth, 48, put him on a pedestal. Josh was always a source of pride for them, the son they bragged about to everyone, convinced that he would achieve great things. During my childhood, I learned to live with the fact that he received all the praise. Although it hurt, I tried not to make a big deal of it because I recognized that Josh was talented, hardworking and had clear ambitions. My parents constantly compared me to him, saying things like, "Why can't you be more like Josh?" Or "Look at everything Josh is achieving." Despite everything, I loved my family and believed that they loved me too. At least that's how it was until Josh came back from university. The difference in the way Josh and I were treated while we were growing up was like comparing night and day. For my parents, Josh was their treasure, the son with a promising future who deserved all their support. They gave him every possible opportunity, from sports camps to music lessons, anything he wanted. My parents made it very clear that Josh's success was their #1 priority. They didn't miss any of his practices. They supported him at every game and they organized big celebrations every time he achieved something. His birthdays were real events where his friends and extended family were never lacking. My experience, on the other hand, was completely different. My interests were never taken seriously, they were just seen as unimportant hobbies. My parents showed no enthusiasm for my activities. When I wanted to try something new, like learning an instrument or joining a club, they used to tell me it was a waste of time and that it would distract me from my real responsibilities. Even when I excelled at school, my achievements went unnoticed. I played baseball, but I never saw them in the stands during my games. On my birthdays, I never received gifts from them. All they did was buy a cake from the supermarket and that was it. No party, no guests. I doubt anyone in the extended family even knew when my birthday was. It was painful to see how they went out of their way to encourage and support Josh while I barely received crumbs of attention. The household chores also reflected this favoritism. Josh hardly ever had to help at home. My parents insisted that I should take on more responsibilities because Josh had more important things to focus on. By the time I reached my teens, I was in charge of almost everything: cleaning, dishes, the garden, while Josh could go out with his friends and do whatever he wanted. Looking back now, I realized that they treated me more like a domestic employee than their son. While Josh received unconditional support, my attention seemed to depend on how much I could be of use to them. I grew up feeling like I didn't deserve their time or their interest. When Josh came home with his finance degree and big plans for the future, I was still trying to find my way. In my 20s, I was combining a part-time job with studying at a community college, just trying to figure out how to manage my life. But for my parents, it was clear that I wasn't living up to their expectations. They could only see the contrast between Josh and me. It wasn't that I wasn't trying hard, but that my path didn't fit their definition of success. I wasn't making the same impact as Josh, and that seemed to be the only thing that mattered to them. Josh's return intensified my parents' attention towards him even more. They treated him practically like a king, making sure he had every possible comfort. They prepared special meals for him, kept his room spotless and fulfilled his every wish. They never asked him to help out with anything. Meanwhile, I continued to take care of almost all the household chores. If the lawn needed mowing, the dishes needed washing or the laundry needed doing, it all fell to me. When I questioned why Josh didn't have any responsibilities at home, my mother argued that he deserved to rest after all his hard work at university. I was very surprised to hear that, considering that my part-time job and my studies apparently didn't deserve the same recognition. I had become the one who did all the work while they devoted themselves to Josh. What affected me the most was the way they looked at me. I no longer felt like their son, but as someone who simply shared the same roof. I could achieve something important, like getting the best grade in an exam or getting a promotion at work, and they would barely react. When I shared my small triumphs, they would respond with a disinterested "good for you" before going back to talking about Josh's latest project or work story. Their priorities were clear, and I barely figured in them. It was as if I were invisible. Despite everything, I remained hopeful that things would improve when Josh got a stable job and started contributing financially. I thought that once he started working, my parents would finally see that I was also trying hard. I wanted to believe that they would finally recognize my dedication if I kept working hard. But I was wrong. Josh got a well-paid job shortly after graduating, which only made my parents' favoritism worse. They would boast about his achievements to anyone who would listen about their successful son. I felt more and more like a stranger in my own home. The message was clear: Josh was the son they had always wanted, and I was just taking up space. I soon realized that I needed to leave if I wanted to find some peace of mind, but it wasn't as simple as it seemed. I was still studying, and my part-time job barely covered my basic expenses, let alone rent. So I started saving systematically. Every penny I didn't need for the essentials went straight into my savings. I cut back on every possible expense. I started eating cheaper food, I stopped going out with friends, and I accepted overtime whenever I could. My life became a constant routine of work, study and housework, all while trying to save enough money to be able to live on my own. Those 2 years were very difficult. My parents' treatment of me did not improve at all. In fact, they interpreted my determination to save as a sign of selfishness and accused me of not caring about the family. Meanwhile, they kept expecting me to be available to help Josh with whatever he needed. If he wanted to be taken to his friends' houses, they called me. If he needed something from the shop, they sent for me. My parents didn't even suggest that I help out at home. I felt like I was the only one doing anything productive. While they adored Josh, they treated me as if I only existed for their convenience, but I knew it was best to keep quiet. Confronting them would only make the situation worse, so I focused silently on my goal. Everything took an unexpected turn when I found out that Josh was planning to move out, and not just anywhere, but to a luxury apartment in the city with some work colleagues. Apparently, his salary allowed him to afford that luxury, and he was very excited to experience city life. When he broke the news to my parents, they were devastated. They had hoped he would stay with them. Although they didn't say it directly, they begged him to reconsider, saying things like the house will feel so empty without you and families should stick together. But Josh was determined, and no amount of pleading changed his mind. Seeing their reactions was almost surreal. For the first time, it wasn't me who felt abandoned, but them. I thought that maybe this would make them reflect on how they had treated me, but it was a naive idea. Instead, they turned their frustration on me, indirectly blaming me for Josh's departure. They made subtle comments about how some people didn't value family ties and how selfish it was to abandon those who had always supported you. They never said it to me directly, but the insinuation was clear. They also referred to my silent plans to move away, as if they were comparable to Josh's departure. Then something happened that made me as angry as it surprised me. One day, I accidentally overheard my parents arguing about how they wouldn't be able to keep the house without Josh's help. I had always believed that they were doing well financially, but it turned out that they were counting on Josh to help them once he started working. They had even made some purchases and commitments based on that expectation. Now that he was leaving, they were worried about how they would pay the bills. That's when they started to look for my help, because Josh wasn't just moving out. He also made it clear that he wouldn't be able to help our parents financially, arguing that his life in the city would be expensive and he wouldn't be able to afford to help them. Suddenly, my parents started treating me like I was a valuable part of the family. They were constantly telling me how much they appreciated having me around and how they couldn't imagine the house without me. They even started talking about how families should support each other and how, as they were getting older, they would soon need help. They wanted me to stay, not because they would miss me, but because they needed my financial support. After years of treating me as if I were invisible, they now expected me to take responsibility and support them, even though they had never done the same for me. I found it hard to believe what was happening. It was almost comical to see them pretending we were a close family. They tried to manipulate me emotionally, saying it was my duty as a son to help them now that they were getting older. I almost laughed in their faces. These were the same people who had barely acknowledged my existence throughout my life, unless they needed something. Now, suddenly, they wanted to invoke family ties and expected me to drop everything for them. I felt furious, hurt and completely exhausted. After everything I had endured, they were still treating me like an emergency plan. At that moment, I knew I had to leave earlier than planned. After 2 years of intense work, saving every penny and making sacrifices, I was finally ready to live my life on my own terms. I had put up with their indifference and mistreatment for too long. I wasn't going to throw away all my effort just because they suddenly saw my usefulness. I made my decision, packed my belongings and left without any big goodbyes or explanations. I found a small, cozy apartment that fit my budget, close to my work, and I moved in. For the first time in my life, I could breathe easy. I felt truly free. It's been a few weeks since I moved and I'm still adjusting to the peace I feel. There's no more emotional manipulation. I don't have to live under Josh's shadow. I don't feel like a stranger in my own home. I can focus on myself, make my own decisions and live without constantly being reminded that I'm not enough. However, a part of me still feels conflicted. My parents have been calling and leaving messages saying they miss me and want me to come back. They insist it's my responsibility to help them now, especially since Josh abandoned them. And this is where I ask myself, did I do the right thing? Even though they treated me terribly, they are still my family and part of me feels guilty for leaving them when they needed me the most. Even though I know they only wanted me there for financial reasons. So, am I the bad guy for finally walking away from my parents after years of them treating me like a stranger? Update 1. It's been a couple of weeks since my original post and since I moved out. I'm still adjusting to my new life. My apartment is small but cozy, and for the first time I feel like I can breathe easily. It's comforting to be able to be myself without constantly having to fight for attention or feeling like an afterthought. I feel liberated from living under the shadow of Josh and my parents' manipulations. The truth is that it's a huge relief. Just when I was starting to enjoy some peace and quiet, everything took an unexpected turn. It started with a call from my parents. At first I didn't know what to expect, but when I answered, I was surprised by their friendly tone. They asked if they could visit me at home. Although it seemed strange given our recent history, I accepted. I couldn't help but harbor a little hope that this time would be different. They said they just wanted to talk and, although I had my doubts, I decided to give them a chance. I wasn't particularly excited about their visit, but I thought it might help me find some closure in this whole situation. Maybe they would finally understand how their actions had affected me. Maybe they would even apologize. I didn't have high expectations, but I figured I had nothing to lose by listening to them. A couple of days later, they arrived at my house and at first everything seemed normal, until I noticed that they were carrying several large suitcases. I was completely taken aback and asked them what was going on with all that luggage. They explained that they had lost their house. Apparently, they couldn't keep up with the bills and no longer had enough money to pay the rent. They told me they hoped to stay with me. I had no idea their situation had become so serious. They mentioned that they had been counting on Josh's financial support, but now that he was no longer in the picture, they were having a hard time supporting themselves. I was shocked. It was frustrating enough that they had never considered asking me for help all these years, and now they were turning up expecting me to rescue them. It was like living in a nightmare. After all the abuse they had given me and how they had made me feel, now they were on my doorstep expecting me to take them in. I felt overwhelmed and completely confused about what to do. I felt a mixture of guilt and anger. How could they put me in such a difficult position? They had ignored me for years, and now suddenly they needed my help. Part of me wanted to just shut the door in their faces and tell them to sort out their problems on their own. But they were still my parents, after all. A small part of me couldn't just reject them. I told them I needed to think about it. I didn't want to make hasty decisions, but I wasn't willing to make any promises either. They stayed at my house and the situation was extremely uncomfortable. Having them around after so long felt very strange. The following days passed slowly as I tried to process everything. I went to work and tried to concentrate on my studies, but they kept occupying my thoughts. They had never been concerned about my problems or shown interest in my life. They always reminded me that they preferred Josh in every respect. And now they expected me to welcome them as if nothing had happened. It didn't seem fair to me. One night, I heard something I wish I hadn't. I was in my room trying to work when I heard my parents talking in the living room. I couldn't hear the whole conversation, but I understood enough to get the gist. They were talking about Josh again, which didn't surprise me. This time they were talking about their brief stay with him. It turned out that after losing their house, they had first tried to stay at Josh's apartment in the city. At first he had taken them in, but just a week later he had kicked them out. From what I understood, they had gone out to run some errands and when they returned they found all their belongings in the hallway of the building. From the way they were talking, it was clear that they were very angry with him. They felt he had abandoned them, claiming he had no room for them and couldn't help them while he lived in his luxurious apartment. Honestly, I wasn't surprised. Josh had always been selfish and focused on his own achievements. His priorities were clear and family was not one of them. I never had any illusions about him. Listening to my parents complain about Josh affected me deeply. They had done the same to me, always expecting my help when it suited them, but never considering my needs. Now they were acting like victims, as if Josh had betrayed them, when in reality they had been failing me for years. I didn't confront them about it. Instead, I took a moment to reflect on everything. His visit had only lasted a few days and it simply couldn't go on like this. I couldn't keep pretending to be the perfect son. For years, I tried to earn their love and attention, but it was always a one-sided effort. I was the one doing all the heavy lifting, taking care of everything at home while Josh enjoyed a carefree life. Now that I had finally gained some freedom and was focusing on myself, they suddenly wanted to come back, asking for help just when it suited them. The guilt weighed on me, but I realized that I couldn't fall back into that toxic pattern. I had spent too much time trying to make them happy and earn their love, and it never worked. I needed to prioritize myself, even if it meant saying no to them. Finally, I did. A week ago, I asked them to leave. I told them I couldn't accommodate them, not after everything that had happened. They didn't take it well. There were more hurtful comments and emotional manipulation, but I stood my ground. It was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but I knew it was the right thing for me. It was time to stop being the one who always gave in, the one who always tried to fix things. I couldn't continue to be their backup plan. Update 2. It's been 6 months since my last update. Things have changed drastically, although not in the way I expected. It all started with a phone call. I received a call from an unknown number, and I almost ignored it. I've received enough spam calls to be tired of them, so I was about to let it go to voicemail. But for some reason, I decided to answer. The voice on the other end of the line sounded shaky and nervous. She identified herself as my mother's sister, and then she dropped a shocking revelation that left me completely stunned. She claimed to be my biological mother, explaining that my father had had an affair with her years ago, of which I was the result. Apparently, she was too young and not ready to be a mother at the time, so my father took me in and raised me as his own while she went away. At first I thought it was crazy. How could this be real? I've known my parents all my life, and they've never mentioned anything like this. She insisted, saying she had proof and wanted to meet me. She sounded so convinced, and something inside me told me I should listen to her. Part of me wanted to dismiss it all as nonsense, but another part was intrigued. Could it be true? She assured me that she could explain everything and promised to show me evidence if I met with her. I was completely torn about what to do. My emotions were in turmoil, but deep down, I needed answers. I had spent so long feeling unwanted, trying to understand why my parents treated me the way they did. Maybe this was the explanation I needed. So, although with doubts, I decided to meet with her. When we met, I saw that she was telling the truth. She had all the evidence, documents, photographs, letters. It all hit me like an avalanche. The more she revealed, the clearer it became that everything she said was true. I examined everything she gave me, and it all fitted together perfectly. It was all genuine. My whole life had been a lie, and I hadn't had the slightest idea. I finally got the truth, and it was devastating. My mother never really loved me. She hated me because I was the child of the affair between her sister and her husband. Whenever she showed any affection towards me, it was pure acting. She hates me. And my father was no better. He couldn't stand me either, but for a different reason. I was the constant reminder of the affair that almost destroyed his marriage. Both of them had been lying to me all my life. All the strange signals and behavior made sense. My mother's coldness and my father's emotional distance. Now it all fitted together perfectly. I confronted my parents. I needed to hear the truth directly from them, to confirm whether what I had discovered was true. Their reaction surprised me. They didn't deny anything or try to minimize it as if I were confused. Instead, they confirmed everything without sugarcoating the truth. My mother said she finally felt free. She no longer had to pretend that I was her son or bear the shame she had been keeping inside. It turned out that she had been building up resentment towards me all this time. My father wasn't any better. He admitted that he never really loved me and that he had considered me a burden for years. He said that he had only kept me around because of the circumstances, not out of love. I was simply a mistake that he had to deal with and a reminder of his error. It was like being punched in the stomach. I had spent years seeking their approval, wanting them to love me. I did everything I could, hoping they would finally see me as their son. But in the end, it was all in vain. I was never truly loved by either of them. They both had their own agendas, using me without really caring about who I was. My whole life felt like a lunch. I felt completely betrayed, broken and, honestly, lost. For the first time, I saw them for who they really were. People who never cared about me, never wanted me around and only kept me around out of obligation. I thought I had freed myself when I moved out, but finding out the truth about my real parents felt like they had crushed me all over again. I had been fighting for their love all this time, only to realize that it never existed. When I finally confronted them, I was met with only cold and cruel truths. My mother said she felt liberated now that she no longer had to pretend to be my mother. She was happy. She didn't seem affected by how things had turned out. It was as if she were relieved to finally admit that I wasn't her son and glad to end the charade. My father's response was similar. He did not apologize for the years of neglect or for making me feel unwanted. He didn't even try to explain anything. Instead, he simply told me that I had ruined everything for him, that I was a constant reminder of his mistake. It was a tremendous shock. I always knew that my relationship with them was problematic, but I never imagined it would go that far. Finding out like that made me realize that everything I believed about my parents was built on lies. They told me it would be better if I didn't try to contact them directly, but they mentioned that they had spent a lot on my education and on raising me in general, so I should give them back what I owe them. I wasn't surprised. I told them I would do it, but that I would need time. My father said it would be fine as long as I paid them a fixed amount every month. When I left their house that day, I felt completely lost. I wanted to cry, but I felt like I had no more tears left. How could I feel the loss of something I never really had? I never had a real family. Not in the way I always imagined. They weren't my parents as I thought. They were just people who took me in, but never really cared about me. Now I feel lonelier than ever. I'm not sure which direction to take. I know I need to move on, but this truth weighs so heavily on me that I don't know how to handle it. I always thought that one day I could forgive them, that they would eventually show me love, but now I realize that was never going to happen. They have shown who they really are, and there is nothing left for me with them. Update 3. 3 months have passed since my last update and things have been complicated. I have spent most of this time trying to reorganize my life and figure out what my next step is. Where am I now? Well, there is practically no relationship with the people I thought were my parents. Apart from the monthly payments I send them to settle what they consider I owe them, there is no communication between us. And to be honest, it doesn't even affect me. In fact, it feels like a relief not to have to pretend anymore that everything is fine. It's like a huge weight has been lifted off my shoulders. I have accepted that I only owe them the money I am paying, and I have stopped seeking their approval. As for Josh, I feel relieved not to have him in my life. I am truly better off without him. About a month ago, my birth mother called me. I was quite surprised to hear from her. She asked me if I would like to have a relationship with her. I didn't know what to say at the time. I have spent a lot of time thinking about the whole situation, but I don't feel ready to take that step yet. So I told her I needed time. I explained that I couldn't make that decision now, but that maybe in the future, when my life is more stable, I would consider contacting her. She seemed to understand and said she would wait until I felt ready. It felt good to be able to set that boundary. I wasn't sure how she would react, but it was comforting to be able to express what I needed. I don't know where this will lead, but I see it as a possibility for the future. For now, I need to concentrate on myself and get my life in order. Speaking of which, I've been working on myself a lot these last few months. It hasn't been easy, and it's definitely been a slow process. Right now, I'm focusing on developing my career. I don't want to rush anything, and I know I can't force myself to feel better overnight. But I'm taking it one step at a time. Some days are harder than others, and I still have a lot of questions about everything that's happened, but I'm moving forward, and that's what's important. I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who commented and contacted me after my last post. I have truly been deeply touched by all the kindness I have received, and I am very grateful. It's amazing how much it helps to know that there are people who understand your situation, even if they don't know you personally. Your words have made a real difference, and it has been comforting to know that I am not alone in this. I don't know what the future holds. I understand that it will take time, but I am still working on myself. Maybe one day I will decide to contact my birth mother. In fact, I can see that as a real possibility. Just not now. For the moment, I'm taking it one day at a time. I am hopeful that things will get better with time. Once again, thank you all for your support. It means more than you can imagine.